There's this enduring human fascination with the hidden room, the cryptic handshake, the promise of forbidden knowledge. We're talking about secret societies, these shadowy groups that seem to offer, elite belonging and this illusion of absolute control over a world that, frankly, feels completely chaotic most of the time.
It's the original us versus them dynamic, isn't it? These groups, whether they're meeting in a smoke-filled lodge room or in some encrypted digital channel, they fill a really deep psychological void.
How so?
Well, they offer this comforting framework. It suggests that all the random, complex, and often painful events of history are in fact deliberate, that they're traceable, and that they're controlled by someone.
And that's really our mission today. We are diving into a deep stack of academic and historical sources that look at the origins, the core psychology, and the undeniable modern cultural relevance of these hidden orders. We want to understand what they reflect about our own, complicated desire for meaning, for order, and for power. And we're trying to move beyond the movie plots and get into the historical reality here.
And to give this deep dive some structure, we've picked out 3 main case studies because they each show a really different facet of secrecy.
Okay.
So first, you've got the global, just organizational endurance of the Freemasons. They represent this kind of institutionalized, almost public-facing secrecy.
Oh, right. And then second,
the short-lived but culturally immortal Bavarian Illuminati. They represent the power of a conspiracy myth, the ghost in the machine.
And third, we're going to look at the historically controversial Thuggees of India. This is a case study that shows how a colonial power can basically weaponize the narrative of a secret society to justify, massive state overreach.
And the stakes here are actually surprisingly high for you, the listener, because that fundamental architecture of these groups, that system of hidden power and the fear of unseen control, it still actively shapes modern political discourse, online theories.
Everything.
And how we learn to trust, or maybe more importantly, how we learn to distrust our institutions. We're going to show you how understanding the 18th century really helps you decode the chaos of the 21st.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the architects of history. Let's begin with the big one. The group that has endured for centuries, whose symbols, the square and compass, are recognized pretty much globally, the Freemasons. Their story is a powerful masterclass in how an organization can sort of shed its practical purpose and just reinvent itself around a philosophical mission.
To understand the modern lodge, you literally have to start with stone. The origins are tied directly to the medieval guilds of what they called operative stonemasons in Scotland and England. We're talking, as far back as the 14th century.
These were the guys building the cathedrals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A highly skilled craftsmen. They were responsible for constructing the great cathedrals, the castles, all the public works of Europe.
And they had to keep secrets, but we're not talking about esoteric or mystical secrets at this point. They were trade secrets.
Precisely. They traveled constantly, moving from job site to job site, and they needed a way to prove they were genuine masters of their craft when they showed up in a new town.
So the handshakes and passwords were like a union card.
Practical authentication system, yeah. Their secrets were about structural engineering, specific stone joints, geometric techniques, things that gave them a competitive edge and protected their highly specialized wage.
But then, our sources show us, around the 16th, 17th centuries, the demand for building these massive cathedrals, it just slows down drastically. So these guilds, they have all the infrastructure, the lodge, the rituals, the internal hierarchy, but there's no stone to lay. They're facing a bit of an existential crisis.
And this is that pivotal moment of transition, the shift from operative masons, the ones who physically built things, to speculative masons, meaning they started welcoming men who had no connection to stone at all, but were interested in philosophical character building. The tools of the trade, the square, the compass, the level, they stopped being functional objects.
They became symbols.
They became mnemonic devices for moral and spiritual instruction. The compass, for example, wasn't for drawing circles anymore. It taught a man to circumscribe his desires and keep his passions within due bounds.
This philosophical shift gets formalized, institutionalized at a very specific moment in history. The formation of the first Grand Lodge of London in 1717.
And that event, that's the birth of modern speculative masonry. It established a standardized system of degrees, rituals, governance, the whole shebang.
And the timing on that couldn't have been more perfect, because it happened right alongside the explosion of the Enlightenment.
That's the critical link. Suddenly, these lodge rooms weren't just for socializing. They were one of the only places in Britain and the American colonies where men from different social classes could meet on a basis of, well, formal equality.
So you'd have a merchant talking to a noble.
A doctor talking to a bricklayer, yeah. All shielded by the secrecy of the lodge.
And the 18th century sources, they consistently emphasize the role of Masonry as this crucial social glue during the American Revolution. I mean, Washington was a Mason, Franklin was a Mason.
Paul Revere was the Grand Master of the Massachusetts Lodge.
Right.
The lodge room was one of the few places where you could discuss inherently political and revolutionary concepts like individual liberty, republicanism, the rights of man, without immediately falling under the scrutiny of the British Crown.
So it functioned as a safe space for Enlightenment discourse.
And crucially, for dissent against the established monarchy or religious authority.
Historian Margaret Jacob has this theory, which we pulled from the sources. She calls them laboratories of democracy. And I think that idea deserves a moment. It's a really powerful claim.
It is, because it explains not just who met there, but what they were practicing. Jacob argues that these lodges taught the fundamental civic skills you need for a functioning republic.
Okay, break that down.
Well, imagine an ordinary man, a commoner, coming into the lodge. He learns how to hold an election for the worshipful master. He learns how to draft and debate internal bylaws, their own little constitution.
They were practicing rudimentary Robert's Rules of Order.
Exactly. These weren't mystical ceremonies. They were dry runs for the Constitutional Convention. These skills were revolutionary training for people who had zero experience in self-governance.
So when the time came to build a new country, they weren't starting from scratch.
Not at all. They'd been running mini-democracies for decades in their own lodge rooms.
And just to add a human element here, the sources also give us this wonderful lesser-known fact. These early lodges, they weren't always these solemn philosophical retreats. They could get pretty rowdy.
Oh yeah, the minute books, the records, sometimes they show these detailed lists of fines being levied against members.
For what?
You see a real tension between the Enlightenment ideal and the reality of 18th century social life. Members were fined for cursing, for excessive drinking.
Of course.
And for trying to violate the house rules by discussing actual contemporary party politics or religion, which was strictly forbidden.
So they were trying to foster this universal fraternity.
But sometimes they were just managing a particularly spirited drinking club. The fraternity and the bonds of trust, they were forged in that shared social space, not just in the high-minded lectures.
Okay, so if the Freemasons are the enduring infrastructure of secrecy, the Bavarian Illuminati is the ghost that just never leaves the historical stage, even though its lifespan was, what, shorter than most modern startups.
The irony is just profound. Historically, the Illuminati was a spectacular, short-lived failure. And yet it became arguably the most famous secret society in history.
All because of a perfect storm of timing and bad luck.
Exactly. Let's pinpoint that exact brief window. They were founded on May 1st, 1776 a year, forever associated with revolution in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt.
And Weishaupt was a professor of canon law at the Jesuit-controlled University of Ingolstadt. That context is vital, right?
Everything. Bavaria was intensely conservative. It was dominated by the intellectual influence of the Jesuit order and the Catholic Church, who were often in lockstep with the monarchy. Weishaupt was this anti-clerical intellectual who wanted to fight that suffocating authoritarianism.
His goal was pure enlightenment.
Pure enlightenment. To oppose religious influence, promote secularism and reason, and ultimately to enlighten the world. He wanted to infiltrate public institutions, schools, courts, governments, with rationalists to reform society from within.
Basically replacing religious dogma with pure, unadulterated reason.
And he needed secrecy, because these were treasonous ideas in Bavaria in 1776. But the organization, which was structured sort of clumsily after Freemasonry, it was full of internal conflict and paranoia.
And it was quickly infiltrated.
By government spies, yeah. The Bavarian elector, Karl Theodor, suppressed the order just 9 years later in 1785. The society effectively ceased to exist. Our sources confirm that membership probably never got over 2,000 people.
So a marginal intellectual group. If they were so short-lived, how on earth did they become the eternal boogeyman?
This is the crucial twist of fate. When the order was suppressed, the authorities, they wanted to create a public spectacle justify their aggressive crackdown. So they seized all of Weishaupt's papers, documents, protocols, everything.
And they published them.
They published them widely across Europe to expose and discredit the group. The hope was to show the public how dangerous these radicals were.
So the very action taken to destroy the Illuminati, it ended up creating the permanent fuel for every conspiracy theory that came after.
Exactly. Those published documents, they detailed these grand, ambitious plans for world reform. They named powerful members, outlined all their protocols for secrecy. So when the French Revolution erupts just a few years later, what do you think happened?
The conservatives needed someone to blame.
They needed a simple, controllable reason for all that chaos. They didn't blame poverty or class conflict. They blamed the defunct, exposed Illuminati.
And the myth was born.
The Illuminati became the convenient, secret ghost that provided a simple, satisfying explanation for every single revolution, social disruption, and political upheaval that followed. They're the ultimate example of a failed historical entity achieving immortal cultural relevance through an accidental act of exposure.
Now we take a thematic turn toward the darker side of secrecy with the Thuggees of colonial India. This group represents organized, ritualized violence, shrouded in mystery, and they operated for centuries. Some sources say they go back to the 1300s.
The Thuggees, as described by the British, were bands of ritualized highway robbers. They operated on the major trade routes of India.
And their method was unique.
It was. They'd often spend days or even weeks integrating themselves with groups of travelers, gaining their trust, before they'd turn on them, murder them, and rob them.
And the method of murder was famously specific and ritualized, wasn't it?
Yes. The primary method was strangulation, often using a weighted yellow silk scarf known as the rumal.
The rumal.
And the British emphasized that these acts were often framed as a religious devotion to the Hindu goddess Kali, the fierce aspect of the goddess associated with destruction and transformation. The ritualized nature, the perceived fanaticism, and just the sheer volume of claimed victims. It made them terrifying to the British colonial imagination.
This group became the specific target of one of the earliest examples of, well, modern surveillance policing. Tell us about British officer William Sleeman and his efforts in the 1830s.
Sleeman led a massive, relentless campaign specifically designed to extirpate or wipe out the Thuggees. He established the Thuggee and Dacoity Department, creating a highly centralized, modern investigative and judicial apparatus.
So this was a major operation.
Groundbreaking in its scope, they developed vast networks of informants known as approvers, who were former Thuggees who confessed to save their own lives. This led to thousands of arrests, trials, convictions. It was a huge, organized intelligence-gathering operation.
But the historical reassessment of the Thuggees raises some pretty crucial questions about the narrative the British were using to justify all this.
And that's where the nuance comes in. The British colonial government, and Sleeman in particular, promoted this idea that the Thuggees were a vast, unified, pan-Indian death cult.
A single entity.
A single entity with a single ideology operating seamlessly across ethnic and religious lines throughout the entire subcontinent.
And modern historians now suggest that this unified cult narrative was exaggerated.
Significantly exaggerated. Scholars like Mike Dash and Tom Lloyd, they argue that while bands of violent highway robbers certainly existed, and they committed horrific crimes, the idea of a single, monolithic, highly organized death cult was basically a colonial invention.
Why? What purpose did that serve?
A powerful political purpose. Think about it. If you can convince your own people, and more importantly the imperial government back in London, that a vast, evil, satanic cult is operating a state within a state.
It gives you a blank check.
Precisely. It provides an irrefutable justification for aggressive, centralized colonial policing, for the mass suspension of normal civil liberties, and for the expansion of British administrative power across territories. It created a necessary colonial monster.
It's also fascinating that the very word we use today, thug, it comes from this moment of colonial sensationalism.
It does.
Yeah.
The English word thug comes from the Hindi word thag, which originally just meant deceiver or cheat or swindler.
Yeah.
Didn't necessarily mean ritual murderer.
So the British took this relatively neutral term for a criminal.
And they attached it to the most sensational acts of highway murder, creating the legendary Thuggee identity. They essentially weaponized a local term to create an international ghost story that justified their military and judicial actions.
It's a powerful lesson in how quickly the idea of a secret society can be mobilized by power structures to centralize their own authority. It shows that sometimes the most dangerous secret society is the one that's been politically manufactured.
So we've seen these really disparate historical groups, from educated philosophical gentlemen to highway criminals, and they're all relying on the exact same infrastructure. Secrecy.
Which tells us the power of the hidden order isn't just historical, it has to be rooted in our own human wiring.
Exactly.
So this is where we shift from what they did to how they functioned. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the craving for secrecy, it's fundamentally about architecture and identity.
Let's start with the architecture. The key insight here comes from the sociologist Georg Simmel, writing back in the early 20th century. Simmel didn't see secrecy as just, a lack of information. He called it a fundamental sociological form, an active, creative construction.
Okay, what does that creative act achieve?
Simmel explained that the moment two or more people share a secret, they are actively creating a social structure. They are erecting an invisible but very powerful wall between the in-group, who have the knowledge, and the out-group, who are excluded from it.
So it's an instant us versus them.
And that wall immediately defines their relationship and elevates the importance of their bond. It's a simple concept, but it's incredibly profound. That shared, exclusive knowledge instantly creates status and value in the relationship, which of course is the foundation of social capital.
Right.
Historically, secret societies were powerful, often exclusive, networking systems. They offered social capital, networks of trust, reciprocal favors that were just not available to the masses outside that wall.
Like the Masons you mentioned earlier.
Think back to 18th century Masonry. If you were traveling and found yourself in a town where you knew nobody, a shared handshake and a password instantly opened doors to lodging, to business contacts, to mutual aid.
That kind of closed-loop trust is invaluable. But it also explains why the public becomes instantly suspicious. If wealth and power are being exchanged behind that wall, the assumption is that the system is rigged.
Precisely. That historic function providing trust and opportunity is why these groups simultaneously fostered civic good like mutual aid and bred intense public accusations of cronyism and the whole old boys club critique. The wall cuts both ways. It protects, but it also excludes and can shield wrongdoing.
Okay, so beyond the sociological networking, the psychological pull of a secret society is incredibly powerful. We live in a world that is messy, complex, and often just brutally random.
And that randomness is anxiety-inducing. One of the strongest psychological drivers for the popularity of these narratives is the lure of control. In a chaotic world, whether it's a plague, a collapsing economy, political instability, the idea of a hidden cabal suggests that someone is in control.
Even if that control is perceived as evil, like the Illuminati manipulating the stock market, it's still oddly comforting.
It is. It implies a rational structure behind the chaos. It satisfies that innate human desire for agency. As the philosopher Karl Popper warned in his work on the conspiracy theory of society, people explain complex, chaotic world events by attributing them to powerful, hidden agents.
It's just easier.
It's much easier to blame a specific, identifiable group than to grasp the true complexity of global economic forces. It simplifies the anxiety.
It restores a narrative order. But what about the members themselves? The ordinary person joining a lodge? What's the psychological transformation happening for them?
This is a deep dive into identity theory. These orders provide an immediate, elevated sense of elite identity. The vast majority of people live relatively mundane lives,
Right.
But upon initiation, they are transformed into someone of cosmic importance. If you're a Mason and you achieve a title like Prince of the Royal Secret, you are no longer just Joe the accountant. You're part of a secret history, endowed with hidden knowledge.
It satisfies the need for belonging, but on an exclusive, elevated plane. The ritual literally strips away the mundane self and replaces it with this elite self.
And this transition relies so heavily on the power of initiation. The rites, the blindfold, the symbolic journeys, the often frightening oaths, they're not arbitrary. They function as a powerful neuro-linguistic anchor.
What do you mean by that?
They're designed to be stressful, confusing, challenging, and then it's followed by this immense relief and triumph of acceptance. That emotional roller coaster creates the anchor.
And the sources cite the work of psychologists Aronson and Mills on cognitive dissonance.
Yes, and the core finding is so simple. The harder the initiation, the more the initiate has invested in time, emotion, sometimes money, and therefore, the more value they must assign to the group to justify that effort.
It's a self-reinforcing loop. I suffered through this difficult, strange ritual. Therefore, this group must be incredibly important. Otherwise, my suffering was meaningless.
Exactly. If you have to pay a massive price to join an exclusive club, you're going to value that membership far more than if it were just handed to you. It binds the individual to the groups through self-justification.
And finally, let's touch on that Jungian perspective. This suggests these groups are, externalizing our repressed desires.
Carl Jung argued that secret societies externalize the shadow self. This is the part of our collective unconscious that holds our desires for unchecked power, for control, for hierarchy, for hidden influence, all the parts we repress in polite society.
And the secret society provides a space for that.
A socially sanctioned, symbolic space where the shadow self can be acted out. Members can be a powerful prince in the lodge, even if they're a clerk outside of it. It's an essential pressure release valve for the human ego.
So the moment that secrecy is breached, the wall collapses and the public reaction can be severe. The history of these orders shows that opacity is a double-edged sword. It can provide security, but it can also shield genuine corruption.
And that tension between a shield for liberty and a shroud for corruption is what defines the public discourse around secrecy. We have two incredibly powerful historical examples of secrets spilling over.
Let's look at the U.S. in 1826 with the Morgan Affair. This is a crazy story that fundamentally altered American political history, but it often gets overlooked in history class.
William Morgan was a Mason in Batavia, New York. He became deeply disgruntled with his local lodge and threatened to publish a detailed book exposing the order's secret rituals, oaths, passwords, everything.
And before he could publish it,
he was forcibly kidnapped, taken across state lines, and disappeared near Niagara Falls. He was universally presumed to have been murdered by his former brethren.
The public outrage was immediate and massive. It wasn't just about a murder. It was about the perception that an organization was placing its secret oath above the laws of the land.
Above the lives of its citizens, yeah.
Yep.
And this sparked the anti-Masonic Party.
Which is key. This was the first significant third party in American history.
And it was founded purely on a platform of anti-secrecy. It successfully capitalized on the widespread visceral fear that Masons were operating as state within a state, a parallel government where loyalty to the Brotherhood superseded loyalty to the Republic.
And it worked. It forced Masonry into decades of decline in the U.S., forcing them to become much more public, emphasizing their charitable works,
which were much harder to criticize.
Yeah. And toning down the more extravagant parts of their secrecy to win back public trust. It really proved that a democracy can be profoundly shaped by the fear of hidden power.
And if the Morgan Affair shows how secrecy breeds fear, the Italian Propaganda Do, or P2, Masonic Lodge, shows how secrecy can actively shield outright criminal corruption.
This case is the definitive proof point for conspiracy theorists because sometimes the conspiracy is actually true.
It is. P2, operating in the 1970s and 80s, started as a legitimate Masonic lodge, but under its leader, Licio Gelli, it basically metastasized into a vast criminal network.
It enrolled powerful figures from across the spectrum.
Top military generals, heads of intelligence agencies, major industrialists, bankers, high-level politicians. The documents that were seized in 1981 proved P2 was, in effect, a fully functional shadow government.
And what were they involved in?
High-level financial corruption, massive banking scandals, political assassinations, and attempts to destabilize Italy's democratic structure. P2 was the ultimate confirmation that a private, secret network hidden behind the facade of fraternity could be used explicitly to achieve political and financial goals outside the legal democratic process. The lack of transparency was their greatest asset.
This brings us back to that core ethical contradiction. These societies preach high-minded Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, but historically they have almost universally practiced intense, rigid exclusion.
The hypocrisy is structural. In the American colonies, for example, the promise of universal brotherhood stopped immediately at racial and often religious lines.
But that exclusion didn't stifle the desire for fraternity, it just channeled it into parallel, separate organizations.
Which is where the history of Prince Hall Freemasonry comes in.
Yes.
It was founded in the 1780s by Prince Hall and other African Americans in Boston after they were repeatedly denied entry into the existing white lodges.
And our sources highlight that Prince Hall Masonry adopted the architecture of the order, the rituals, the degrees, but it repurposed encompassed its entire focus.
It became less about speculative philosophy and much more about Black community empowerment, mutual aid, civic leadership, and political resistance during the decades leading up to the Civil Rights Movement. It used the structure of secrecy and shared bonding to foster resilience against a white-dominated society that was actively oppressing them. Okay, so considering the idealism, the corruption, the counter-movements, we have to ask the central academic question: what is the actual core secret these groups are guarding, if anything?
The sources point us toward a theory from Umberto Eco, the late Italian philosopher, particularly in his novel Foucault's Pendulum, and his thesis has become profoundly influential.
Eco's idea is brilliant because it just turns the entire premise on its head. The secret of most societies, he argued, is that there is no secret.
The ultimate revelation is a void.
Exactly. The true, enduring power lies entirely in the pursuit of the mystery, not the actual revelation. It's the constant postponement of the answer that maintains the power. The journey is the reward.
So if you, the initiate, finally reach the highest degree and the grand secret is revealed to be, a list of mundane ethical rules you already knew,
The power dissipates. The group loses its authority. But by keeping the true secret just out of reach, they perpetually sustain belief, investment, and loyalty. It maintains the internal hierarchy and the external fascination.
This ties back perfectly to Karl Popper's warning about our impulse to seek simplified explanations. The conspiracy theory of society thrives on the idea that there is a secret.
It connects those two concepts perfectly. The world is too complex, too random, too terrifying to just accept chaos. So we invent a powerful, hidden agent, a vast conspiracy. And the power of that mystery sustains both the conspirators, if they exist, and the theorists, if they don't. It provides clarity where there is only complexity.
So we arrive at the biggest myth we need to confront, the idea that secrecy automatically equals evil.
When in reality, our sources remind us, secrecy often equals protection. Historically, those Masonic lodges were shields for liberty, protecting freethinkers under authoritarian regimes. If you were discussing the abolition of monarchy, you absolutely needed a secret space.
So the core tension isn't good versus evil, it's protection versus accountability.
And we, as critical thinkers, have to discern which function a secret structure is actually serving in any given context. Is it shielding the vulnerable, or is it shielding the corrupt? We've established that the historical societies were often more about social networking and philosophy than global domination. But the narrative of global domination, fueled by suppressed papers and paranoia, that didn't die.
So what does this all mean? How does this 18th century architecture of secrecy manifest today in our transparent, data-driven world? How do we find the modern equivalent of the hidden lodge?
Well, the Illuminati in particular has achieved a kind of cultural immortality. It's completely divorced from its historical 9-year existence. It's been rebranded as a persistent, self-replicating cultural meme.
Especially in pop culture.
Oh, absolutely. It's no longer a historical group. It's a cultural placeholder for any powerful, unseen force that operates among the global elite. When you see fans obsessively analyzing music videos from artists like Jay-Z or Beyoncé looking for hand gestures or symbols, yeah, you see that everywhere online. They are treating the entertainment industry itself as a contemporary mystery cult. The symbols are the new rituals, and the goal is to decode the perceived secret path to wealth and power. And the most pervasive visual example of this symbolic reinterpretation has to be the Eye of Providence on the American $1 bill. It's a perfect case study in the triumph of narrative over intent. Historically, that symbol, hovering over the incomplete pyramid, it was chosen by the Continental Congress as a Christian symbol of God's watchfulness over the new nation.
It has no direct confirmed link to the Illuminati.
None. Yet today, it's almost universally interpreted by so many people as definitive proof of a Masonic Illuminati grip on the treasury, the ultimate sign of the New World Order.
The historical fact is irrelevant. The symbolic power is absolute. The anxiety we talked about who's in control, it's literally engraved onto our currency.
And we also still have the physical, hyper-elite societies that exist purely to confer social capital, like Yale's Skull and Bones.
Skull and Bones is a classic case study of a modern power elite secret society. It might have strange rituals, but its true power isn't in dark magic, but in the unparalleled lifelong network access it guarantees.
When its initiates include figures who become presidents, like the Bush family, or secretaries of state, like John Kerry, the value of that connection is priceless. The secret is that you get to call your classmate who is now the Secretary of Defense. That network is the new ritual.
The physical lodge might be diminishing, but the form of the secret society seems to be replicating perfectly in the digital world. We're seeing a new architecture of secrecy emerge, based on code and data.
The sources argue pretty convincingly that the classic secret society structure is thriving in modern tech culture, especially among the extreme elite. You see tech billionaires building massive, secure bunkers, investing in radical life extension.
And operating in these closed, opaque investment ecosystems, they're perceived as forming a new, modern, neo-Gnostic priesthood.
And the secret knowledge they hoard isn't ancient texts or alchemy, it's data and proprietary control over systems.
The algorithm is the modern equivalent of the cryptic ritual.
It's a perfect parallel. It's proprietary, it's inscrutable to the masses, its logic is hidden away, yet it shapes their reality. What they consume, whom they date, how they vote. It functions exactly like the ancient mysteries, hidden knowledge that grants incredible world-shaping power to the initiates.
So the next secret societies aren't in smoke-filled basements with ropes. They're already being built on code and in encrypted spaces.
Absolutely. Think about decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. While they're technically open source, the actual decision-making is often opaque to outsiders, controlled only by the code and the token-holding elite.
So the new lodge is, what, a Discord server?
A closed Discord server, encrypted channels on the dark web. They offer the exact same psychological and sociological rewards as the ancient lodge. Exclusive belonging, shared secret knowledge like crypto keys or private data sets, and a powerful sense of operating outside the public system. They're the new architectures of secrecy, using encryption as their shield.
It's important to pull back and acknowledge that the perception of these groups isn't monolithic globally. The meaning of secrecy shifts dramatically depending on the regional history.
Yeah, in the Global South, for instance, these groups, particularly Freemasonry, are often viewed through a sharp lens of post-colonial suspicion. They're directly linked to the machinery of British imperialism.
And that suspicion is often formalized into outright bans in certain regions.
Yes. In many parts of the Islamic world, for example, governments ban Freemasonry, viewing it as a Western, quasi-religious incursion. Conversely, in places like East Asia, secret societies have a deep, complex history, often tied to resistance movements or revolutionary plots, giving them a more positive connotation in some contexts.
So let's synthesize this complexity by looking at the definitive ethical tension. If we weigh all the evidence, the good they've done, the corruption they've shielded, what are the clear benefits versus the inherent dangers?
On the benefit side, the evidence is clear. They provide immense philanthropic works, like the Shriners Hospitals. They provide strong social cohesion, acting as vital safe havens and intellectual training grounds, especially in autocratic environments.
And the dangers are formidable.
The dangers are structural. Elitism, the total lack of accountability, as proven by P2, and social fragmentation, that us versus them mentality that can amplify paranoia and misinformation. Their opacity makes them perfect scapegoats for society's ills.
In the end, the secret society is, as you said, a tool. And like any powerful tool, its moral character is determined by the intent of the hand that wields it. We've traveled from the operative stonemasons of medieval Scotland practicing their trade secrets to the modern-day tech mogul guarding proprietary algorithms. The conclusion we keep returning to is that secret societies aren't historical curiosities. They're profound mirrors.
They reflect our collective, enduring hunger for meaning, for control, and for belonging. The deep human needs that our public, bureaucratic, and increasingly fragmented institutions often fail to satisfy. They aren't the cause of social uncertainty, they're a symptom of it.
The real lesson we have to take from this deep dive is that the true danger isn't the existence of a secret club itself. It's unquestioned belief without evidence. The real power, the true secret weapon, lies in critical thinking and demanding empirical proof behind the myth.
If the mystery is powerful because it suggests the world is more deliberate and organized than it appears, then the greatest power we possess is the ability to look at those cryptic symbols, those veiled threats, and refuse to accept the convenient answer until we've done the work ourselves.
And that leaves us with a provocative final thought, something for you to mull over. In a world driven toward total, algorithmic transparency and digital surveillance, where everything we do is logged and tracked, the secret, the true hidden bond, the unshared, unlogged knowledge, is perhaps the only thing left that feels genuinely private and truly powerful. So the question for humanity is, do we truly want a world of total, blinding light, or do we need the shadows to stay sane?